Jonathon Van Maren is a Canadian pro-life activist and columnist. He is a communications director for the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform, whose vision is nothing less than an abortion-free Canada. Jonathon is the author of titles such as Seeing is Believing, Why Our Culture Must Face the Victims of Abortion, and Patriots, The Untold Story of Ireland's Pro-Life Movement. When Roe v. Wade was overturned in 2022, Jonathon acknowledged it as the biggest blow the sexual revolution had ever received. Jonathon, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Can I ask, first of all, what inspired you to get involved with this work and effectively to dedicate your life to the pro-life cause?
It was an encounter with abortion that was quite unexpected. It was my first year of university. I was going for my degree in history, and my long-term plan at the time was academia. And one of my professors mentioned abortion in the classroom, just sort of casually, as if it was an objectively good thing, and there was no debate about that. And I grew up in a pro-life Christian home, and I knew that wasn't true, but I didn't really know how to argue about it. So I went up to the library and I Googled abortion to find some arguments, and ended up watching an abortion video from start to finish. And seeing that baby be violently destroyed changed the course of my life in a literal sort of before or after way. I joined the pro-life club on campus. I ended up getting involved in doing a pro-life outreach with the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform when Stephanie Gray was still the executive director, and realizing that when you talk to people and showed them what abortion was, so often you could see them change their mind, cancel their abortions, kind of made me realize there's something I can do about this. And there it went.
So having become activated, if you like, what have you found to be the most effective arguments or the most effective strategies when you're talking to people, let's say those who are in the kind of general mass in the middle, the sort of undecideds, the people who don't give it a huge amount of thought and maybe deliberately keep it out of their minds?
So we use a two-pronged approach at CCBR, and it's based on intensive research. We've hired pollsters to test our projects to ensure that they're effective. We're constantly honing our conversational apologetics on the street. And so for arguments, we find the most effective argument to be the human rights argument, which is an argument that still appeals to the vast majority of mushy middle people, even if they have sort of no defined moral code that they could refer to. And it's very simple. Human beings have human rights. Human rights begin when the human being begins. Science tells us when a human life begins, and therefore abortion is a human rights violation. And there's so many intuitive things that a pro-choicer will say that can be used against them as well when they say, oh, we don't know when life begins. And then we say, well, when do you think life begins? Oh, maybe 12 weeks. Well, 12 weeks from what? You've told us actually when life begins, just by the language that you use in discussing this. And so that's one of the primary arguments that we use. Strategically speaking, it is abortion victim photography, which is not an idea that we came up with. The use of victim imagery to shift a culture on an issue of injustice, to essentially present the best evidence for our case in the public square, was first invented by William Wilberforce, Thomas Clarkson, and the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade in 1787, and then subsequently used by the Congo Reform Movement here in the UK, used by the American Civil Rights Movement under Martin Luther King Jr., the National Child Labor Committee under Lewis Hine. And so what we've done is we've adopted and adapted these historically proven tactics of social reform for the 21st century abortion context. And we've seen tremendous success with that.
Because there has often been a reluctance, maybe even a squeamishness, often on the part of pro-life activists about using such stark imagery. But your experience is that it can be very effective.
The imagery is incredibly powerful because it's essentially answering the question, right to choose what. And it's also, we live in a visual culture, and so visuals are even more important than they were 25 years ago. People don't think in ethics, and people don't think in apologetics, and they don't think certainly in philosophy or theology. They think in stories. And so we need to introduce them to the victims of abortion. We need to show them that abortion is not about a what, but about a who. And so our polling shows 67% of people who just see an image of an aborted baby feel more negatively about abortion just because of what they saw.
Now, we know on one sense the impact of abortion in the demographic sense. Western societies are now millions of people short from what they should have had. Yeah. What about the other cultural effects, the downstream from the actual abortion, what do you think are the biggest and the most dangerous cultural effects of societies that allow abortion?
This is a very hard question to answer because I don't think we fully know yet what the downstream effects of abortion are, right? Mother Teresa famously said in her Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech that if a mother can kill her child in the womb, what is left but for me and you to kill each other? And I thought of that when I saw the news of the assassination of Charlie Kirk break, that so many of the acts of violence we're seeing now are people seeing other people as inconvenient, which is the fundamental premise of the abortion worldview. As somebody who's done to countless hours of pro-life outreach, I've heard so many times from people that they'll admit it's a human being, they'll admit that it's even a person, but as long as this baby is entirely dependent on me, it's inconvenient and I can kill him or her. And so you can't have war in the womb and peace in the streets, ultimately, I don't think.
Now, can we learn from international examples in other countries? We often think of these issues as very culturally specific. The debate on the right to life in the USA has its own tone, has its own language, has its own style, similarly in Canada, similarly here. But is there an underpinning that we can all share, that we can all use, but then put our own sort of cultural veneer across the top of it?
I do think that human rights apologetics and abortion victim photography are culturally accessible across lines. But you're 100% correct, of course, that it's very interesting to me often because the American pro-life movement, being one of the world's largest, kind of has an outsized presence in the pro-life space. But then when I spent some time in Ireland prior to the 2018 abortion referendum, it's a completely different cultural context. Their abortion debate is completely different. It's shaped by their own history and their own brilliant and beautiful movement and what they've done. The UK and Canada are, I think, far more similar because our heritage is, of course, similar. Our rates of secularization are very similar. That would be true, I think, for New Zealand and to a degree Australia as well. But I do think that everybody can still understand a picture.
Now, you've written a lot about how the media frames abortion and the influence that the media has on that. What do you think are the biggest lies that the media spread about abortion?
Oh, man, the biggest lies. I think the biggest lie would be that they insist on referring to the abortion debate as if it's pro-lifers arguing with abortion activists. But the main character in this great moral drama, the one who we're all arguing about, the unborn baby, is basically absented. They're an absent character in their own story. And the second worst thing, which would be by far the most effective tactic, is this lie that they pound home relentlessly, which is that you can have a culture that cares for women, or you can have a pro-life regime, one or the other. Savita Halappanavar, the case in Malta, nonstop now in the United States, they are making the fundamental blood libel that women will die if abortion is illegal, which is not the case, but that is by far their most effective propaganda point.
The irony there is that in 1967, when the UK abortion legislation was being passed, it was designed, quote, to stop the backstreet abortions.
Yeah.
We're now in a situation where the majority of our abortions are by pills by post, where they're being taken at home in back streets with bloody and brutal consequences.
Yep.
And effectively, we've come full circle now to having legally permissible backstreet abortions.
Yeah.
So
it's almost like they were lying the first time.
Exactly, and we've got to the truth.
Yeah.
So coming back to the media then, what changes or what lessons do pro-life advocates have to learn to make better use of the media? Can we make better use of the media? Are there mistakes we're making? Should we change our tactics?
So I think that there's two things I would emphasize in relation to the media. The first one is that our projects have to be what we call a force multiplier. If you can force the media to cover your projects, then you win, whether it's getting pictures, imagery of preborn children into the media or abortion victim photography. The second is that when we do an interview with the press, we see it as an opportunity to emphasize the violence of abortion and the humanity of the preborn. And so whatever I'm there to talk about, those are the 2 points that I'm going to make relentlessly. The third one is I do think that we badly need more young pro-lifers who are willing to kind of consider media, because there are these figures that write, there's been some op-eds in the Times of London that were quite good. In the United States, Ross Douthat, a pro-life devout Catholic, writes for the New York Times and openly makes the case against abortion in the New York Times. It's a very tough job to do, but we definitely need voices in those spaces as well.
And is there an issue? Sometimes, again, a lot of young men in this sphere can be a bit reluctant to come forward because they've been influenced by this assertion that this is a debate for women and only women can take part in the debate, and a man doesn't really have the right to pronounce on it, far less to sort of proselytize about it. Is that a problem? Is it something that we should just ignore, or is it something we should account for, be sensitive to, try and maximize the number of young women who we, for example, train and prepare for this sort of apologetics?
The pro-life movement badly needs more men, and they badly need more young men. That's a problem almost everywhere that I've been, actually. No matter where, which country I'm in, it's interesting because the accusation always is the pro-life movement is old white men, right? I'm like, well, we could use some more men, to be completely honest, but most of the pro-life organizations are almost 60-40 female to male. And you need to have a good balance, I find. I always think that an organization balanced brings the genius of both sexes into play when we're fighting this issue that involves both men and women so intimately and so profoundly. And so one, I think men need to recognize that there's nothing more masculine about defending those who can't defend themselves. Nothing more masculine. And then second of all, I think that one of the tragedies of the pro-life movement now is that a lot of young men, because they're struggling with pornography and other issues, feel themselves ill-equipped or are too ashamed to join the pro-life movement because of the way they've been ensnared by things like that. This is another issue I think that needs to be addressed.
Well, we've found that sometimes when we've done vox pops and asked people for their attitudes to decriminalisation, let's say, which happened here not all that long ago, almost to a man, literally, when we ask men, what do you think about this? They pull back and say, it's not for me to say. This is for women. If women want to do it, let them go ahead. It's unusual in that sense. It's hard to think of any other issues which polarize so clearly on sort of gender lines, but it does happen a lot here with young men not wanting to even voice an opinion on that.
Yeah, and that's a combination of being cowed by the establishment that's told them they have nothing to say, but I also think it's a moral surrender, and it is convenient to some degree as well, because if abortion is her choice, then the baby is her problem. And so it is true that for a lot of young men, we find this on university campuses, to say that I have nothing to say about abortion is actually a pretty convenient worldview to hold if you're the sort of person on campus who doesn't mind engaging in promiscuous activity.
Mm-hmm. Of course, irony there is, as you've alluded to, we do have legislation in this country that says a father, even though he's unmarried and has no legal connection to the mother, is legally obliged to support the child. And they can be pursued in the courts to make sure that he does. So he is connected to the child and the life of that child. Are there any areas in the UK, pro-life activism, that give you hope, or in North America for that matter? Are there any developments, any initiatives that you think these are giving me hope for the future of the cause?
Oh, I can give you two very obvious ones. The first is coming here from Canada, where our euthanasia debate involved the state broadcaster having somebody who supported legalization and somebody who didn't think legalization went far enough, and the other side was entirely cut out of it. I have viewed the debate happening here in the UK over the past 2 years with a lot of envy. Even the progressive press, even The Guardian covers the issues. There's a robust debate on assisted suicide, on the implications. The Times came out and did an editorial advising the House of Lords to reject the euthanasia bill. In Canada, there was one columnist at the National Post who said almost anything, and for the rest of it, it was almost a total blackout. And so looking at the vibrancy of the debate here has been very encouraging. And even I talked to Lord David Frost a little while back, him openly saying, we just need to emphasize the fact that our Judeo-Christian heritage is necessary for the protection of the vulnerable. And that's what I'm going to do. And he said to me, increasingly people are just embracing, saying, this is where my values come from, and these values are badly needed in the culture right now. And so that's a really big one. The second sign of hope is, I was genuinely stunned when the decriminalization of abortion happened to see the outpouring of outrage across party lines online. I counted probably half a dozen members of the House of Lords who called it either infanticide or killing a baby. I saw a number of them call it murder, which is extraordinary language for people to use with regard to abortion in any way. It was almost kind of like they were so horrified that the scales fell from their eyes for a moment and they could say what they actually thought without considering the implications for what abortion is all the way up until fertilization. And even Kathleen Stock, like a pro-choice Oxford feminist, called it killing a baby in a column that she wrote. And so it was encouraging to me because we can sink into this sort of despair that everybody's consciences are so hardened that there's no way we're ever going to be able to change people's minds. And then something happens and you see a flicker and you realize, okay, no, people still have the capacity to be horrified, and it's our job to ensure that they don't stop being horrified.
It's interesting you talk about the debate here on assisted suicide, but sadly, if not ironically, the experience in Canada has actually been very, very helpful. It's been very useful because, it's so horrific, so many examples of how MAID has worked and how far and how fast it has pushed. And, we talk about the slippery slope and we see, it seems as if it's free fall now in the Canadian case, the extent to which that's available and becoming so widely acceptable. So the horrendous example of Canada has actually been something we've been able to use to pull people up and say, do you want to go there? It's terrifying.
We have the dubious distinction of being an international cautionary tale that's so bad that Kim Ledbetter actually was offended when somebody compared her bill to Canada. Like, that's who we are now, which is a pretty... it's pretty tragic. But the debate was so... suppressed in Canada that pro-life voices, those who were against assisted suicide, were virtually not allowed to say anything. They were cut out of the press entirely. And at least in the UK, you still have a very vibrant and combative press environment, which, as somebody who comes from a place that doesn't have any of that, I'm very envious of, actually.
Okay. If you were to give a few words of advice to some young people who were watching this and interested in trying to have their voices heard, but seeing so many avenues open to them, do they just pursue perhaps some work in an academic sphere? Do they get involved in politics? Do they stand for election? Do they join a branch, a local organisation and focus on the grassroots activism? Are there any particular words of advice you would give?
So my advice would be twofold. First, consider your talents and how you can use them in a fight for what I think is fundamentally civilization itself. And there is no better cause. Can you think of a better cause to be part of than that? And second of all, my advice would actually be very simple. Join with a group like SPUC because they already know where your talents can be used. Your organization works in politics, it works in outreach, it works in media. You have so many different opportunities. And so even just to get connected with an organization that knows where the fight is happening, where the talents can be applied, where your time could best be used, I think that your organization provides extraordinary guidance for young people and that it's a resource young people should consider using. And so even if they don't join the organization full time, like our organization CCBR in Canada, we say, do a 4-month internship with us and you'll learn so much about yourself and you'll learn so much about the cause and the ways that your own skill set can be used. And so people who have worked for us have gone on to work in politics, to be elected, to work inside the offices of MPs, have gone into academia, and so we can have an effect that way. So connecting with a pro-life organization like yours is what I would advise young people to do, even if it's just to situate yourself in this battle and find out where you can best use your talents.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that advice, Jonathan. Thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you.